Mike Wolfe's sentencing sent a seismic jolt through fans of American Pickers and the broader television viewing public as he was led away in handcuffs, his stoic expression barely concealing the storm beneath. For years, Mike had been a fixture on screen, a quirky, knowledgeable treasure hunter with a keen eye for antique Americana. So when breaking news reported his arrest, many assumed it was related to a dispute over the show, perhaps an argument over profits or production rights with the History Channel. Some speculated it involved a behind-the-scenes fallout with his longtime friend and co-host Frits. But as details emerged, a far darker and more sinister truth unfolded, one that painted the portrait of not just a soured friendship, but a calculated act of betrayal and murder. Authorities stunned the public by announcing that Frits's death, previously ruled as complications from a stroke, was now being investigated and prosecuted as first-degree premeditated murder. Toxicology reports revealed Frank had been given lethal doses of medication that were never prescribed in such quantities. What at first looked like a tragic health-related incident now reeked of manipulation and cold-blooded intent. Prosecutors pointed directly at Mike Wolfe, alleging that he had not only drugged Frits but had done so deliberately, fully aware of what the outcome would be. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't carelessness. It was, as one prosecutor put it, a revenge killing rooted in jealousy and greed. Social media exploded with rumors and screenshots as evidence trickled into the public sphere. A former crew member claimed that Wolfe had been at Fritz's home the night he died. Security footage later confirmed his vehicle's presence roughly 3 hours before emergency services were called. And who placed that 911 call? Wolfe himself, claiming he had stopped by to check on his friend, only to find him unresponsive. Paramedics attempted resuscitation, but it was too late. The cause of death was first attributed to stroke complications, yet the toxicology report told a different, chilling story. Lethal levels of drugs had been introduced into Fritz's system, drugs he hadn't been prescribed at such high doses. What made investigators truly suspicious was Wolfe's behavior after the death. Instead of mourning, he quickly moved to take control of Fritz's collection and legacy. Within 48 hours, he had contacted attorneys about acquiring rights to Fritz's name and image for future merchandise tied to American Pickers. According to production staff, he showed an unnerving level of composure, even enthusiasm, when discussing business opportunities related to Fritz's passing. Witnesses testified that he had immediate access to Fritz's storage units, many of which contained valuable antiques never seen on the show. The speed and precision with which he moved raised serious questions. Had he been preparing for this moment? A search of Wolfe's residence yielded devastating evidence. A hidden safe filled with unmarked prescription bottles later identified as the same drugs found in Fritz's system. But perhaps most disturbing of all was a journal tucked away in his travel bag, filled with years of increasingly hostile musings about Frits. One entry, written just weeks before the death, read, "F thinks he can come back and take half the spotlight again. He forgets that without me, there would be no show. He's become a liability. The network is showing me there's only one way to save what I've built." It was the kind of writing that made even hardened detectives pause. Throughout the 6-week trial, Wolfe sat quietly next to his attorneys, his calm demeanor almost eerie as prosecutors laid out a methodical, almost obsessive plan to end Fritz's life. They introduced evidence of internet searches for how to disguise poisoning as stroke complications and how long after death can toxicology detect drug interactions. It was clear that Wolfe had researched how to make a death look natural, banking on Fritz's past health issues to deflect suspicion. Several former production crew members were called to the stand and testified to an escalating tension between the two men. Heated arguments were witnessed, arguments not staged for television. One assistant recalled Wolfe telling Frits during a confrontation that he no longer had the right to equal billing because of his declining health. Behind closed doors, Wolfe allegedly referred to Frits as dead weight and a threat to the show's future. Testimony revealed that Wolfe actively isolated Frits from longtime contacts and network executives, ensuring he was left out of creative decisions and public appearances. Danielle Colby, their longtime co-star, offered what many considered the most emotional and revealing testimony of the entire trial. Fighting back tears, She described how Wolfe had grown obsessed with being the sole face of American pickers, and how his behavior turned cold and dismissive whenever Fritz's name was mentioned. She confronted him once after finding cryptic notes on Fritz's medication schedule in his office. Wolfe brushed it off, saying he was just concerned about Frank's recovery. But Colby said the tone, the language, and the secrecy made her deeply uneasy. The defense tried to reframe the narrative, painting Wolfe as a misunderstood friend who had once genuinely cared for Fritz and wanted reconciliation. Network executives were brought in to speak of Wolfe's supportive public statements about Fritz's health journey. But this fragile defense unraveled when Fritz's personal physician testified that not only had Fritz been closely monitored during recovery, but he was also optimistic, actively planning to launch his own antique business. Crucially, the doctor confirmed that Fritz had never been prescribed the medication that ultimately killed him, not in those quantities. Then came the turning point of the trial. During cross-examination, Wolfe, who had until then kept his composure, finally snapped. When the prosecutor pressed him about the medication, he lost control and shouted, "You have no idea what it's like to build something from nothing and watch someone else take credit. To smile for the cameras while everyone thinks is just as important to the show's success." That moment shattered any illusion of innocent grief. Jurors would later say this outburst solidified their verdict. Financial motives soon came into sharp focus. Forensic accountants testified that Wolfe had made quiet but calculated moves months before Fritz's death, restructuring his businesses, transferring assets, and creating shell companies, all designed to absorb Fritz's intellectual property and collectibles. He had even taken out a $5 million business insurance policy on Fritz, naming his own company as beneficiary. After only 4 hours of deliberation, the jury returned with a unanimous guilty verdict. When the judge handed down a life sentence without the possibility of parole, the courtroom held its breath. But Wolfe, no longer calm, exploded. "You don't understand," he screamed. "He was going to ruin everything. He was going to destroy my legacy." His voice echoed across the chamber, part rage, part confession, part collapse. For fans of American pickers, it was the unthinkable, the unraveling of a partnership they had watched for years with admiration and nostalgia. The man who once drove dusty backroads with a smile in search of hidden treasures had himself become a cautionary tale, a symbol of ambition gone too far, of betrayal hiding in plain sight, and of the darkest truths lurking behind even the most familiar faces. He lunged across the defense table with an explosive force, sending legal pads, water glasses, and shocked gasps flying into the air as the courtroom descended into chaos. The bailiffs rushed in, but Mike Wolfe was already mid-charge, eyes blazing with fury as he swung wildly toward Frank Fritz's grieving family seated in the front row. Screams erupted from a gallery. People shoved toward the exits in panic, and in the pandemonium, Wolfe broke free a second time. This time, grabbing an antique walking stick entered as evidence. With no hesitation, he swung it like a club, striking a bailiff hard in the shoulder, his voice piercing through the noise. "I built American pickers. It was my life's work." The courtroom was no longer a hall of justice, but a scene of raw, unfiltered rage. 3 more officers tackled him to the ground as the judge was quickly evacuated for safety, while Wolfe kicked and thrashed violently, shrieking about betrayal, loss, and legacy. Fritz's sister, visibly trembling, had to be escorted out by security as Wolfe desperately tried to lunge at her, yelling, "I deserved everything. It was my show." He was finally handcuffed, restrained, but not silenced. Then came the most shocking moment of all. Wolfe, red-faced and restrained, locked eyes with Danielle Colby seated quietly in the gallery. "Tell them the truth," he bellowed, his voice cracked with desperation. "Tell them what Frank was really like." Colby turned away, visibly shaken, unable to respond as other crew members wept openly. The American pickers family, once seemingly tight-knit, now lay in emotional shambles, fractured beyond repair by a trial that had dredged up years of hidden resentment, betrayal, and manipulation. Court documents later revealed that Wolfe had been steadily sowing division for years, pitting production members against Fritz, whispering poisonous doubts and undermining his former partner's credibility in subtle but consistent ways. The outburst confirmed what many feared, that Wolfe's actions were not born of impulse, but of a deep-seated rage that had festered over time. As security wrestled him back into control, Wolfe continued his frenzied tirade. He screamed that Frits had been planning his own show, that he was told by network execs he was no longer needed. "He told me I was obsolete," he roared. "They wanted him back and to cut me out." The scene turned surreal. Reporters described stunned silence followed by rising screams, with at least 3 people injured, including Wolfe's own defense attorney, struck by a flying water pitcher in the melee. Even as he was dragged, kicking and screaming, from the courtroom, Wolfe continued shouting about betrayal, about legacy, about being the real face of the show. Legal experts would later agree that this violent breakdown all but erased any hope for a successful appeal. His behavior shattered the defense's carefully crafted narrative of a misunderstood businessman and instead painted him as unhinged and dangerous. In the days that followed, new accounts emerged that cast an even darker shadow over Wolfe's once wholesome image. Former colleagues came forward, no longer restrained by loyalty or NDAs. Thomas Reynolds, a former producer, described how Wolfe would fly into rage-fueled tantrums off-camera, screaming at junior staff over the smallest errors. He maintained this perfect folksy image for the fans, Reynolds said. But when the cameras stopped rolling, he could be terrifying. Others confirmed this shift, noting that over the years, he grew increasingly paranoid, convinced that Frits was plotting a comeback that would eclipse his own spotlight. Behind the scenes, he was spiraling, a narcissist feeding on power and terrified of losing control. Mental health experts who analyzed the case diagnosed classic signs of narcissistic personality disorder, exacerbated by fame and a perceived betrayal from someone he once called a friend. Dr. Robert Keller, a forensic psychologist, explained, Wolfe experienced a narcissistic injury when Frits left the show and found renewed support. That injury festered into vengeance. In the aftermath, American Pickers, once a celebrated ode to Americana, now finds itself in disarray. The History Channel has pulled all episodes featuring Wolfe from circulation and issued a statement expressing sympathy for Fritz's family and shock at the events that unfolded. Major sponsors quickly withdrew their support. The show's future remains uncertain, its legacy now clouded by scandal, grief, and violence. Fritz's family has since filed for legal control over his antique collection and intellectual property, vowing to protect his name from further exploitation and taking steps to sue the network for what they claim was its failure to intervene as Wolfe's behavior became increasingly erratic. Perhaps most disturbing of all was the revelation that, in the immediate aftermath of Fritz's death, Wolfe took to social media to publicly mourn his friend. He posted emotional tributes, attributed Frank's passing to stroke complications, and announced limited edition memorabilia to honor his legacy. Prosecutors later confirmed that over $1 million was raised from trusting fans in the weeks after Fritz's death, money which was quietly funneled into private account controlled solely by Wolfe. This wasn't just murder, prosecutor Sarah Donovan said in her closing remarks. It was a calculated deception. He didn't just betray a friend. He manipulated millions of grieving viewers to enrich himself. The fallout has left a permanent scar on the reality television world. Longtime fans expressed a painful sense of betrayal, grappling with the realization that the man who had invited them into his cross-country adventures week after week had been hiding a darkness all along. "We welcomed him into our homes," said viewer Robert Jenkins. "We trusted his passion for history, his enthusiasm. Now it all feels like a con." Former celebrity guests on the show have publicly distanced themselves from Wolfe, while Danielle Colby has taken a leave of absence from television, requesting privacy and healing time. "We were brought together by a love for preservation," she said in a brief statement, "and I still hope that legacy can survive this tragedy." As the dust settles and the doors of a prison cell close on Mike Wolfe for the rest of his life, his final words to the courtroom echo ominously, "Goodbye forever to all of you. The truth will come out someday." Whether these were the desperate gasps of a guilty man or the final performance of a master manipulator remains open to interpretation. What's certain, however, is that the image of American pickers, once a celebration of friendship, history, and humble discovery, has been irreparably shattered by violence, betrayal, and a courtroom meltdown that tore the curtain back on the man behind the myth.